They laughed as the fabric ripped, called me pathetic, told me I'd never belong in their world. But what they didn't know? The man watching from across that ballroom wasn't just any guest. He was the reason everyone was there, and what he did next changed everything. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been made to feel small by people who were supposed to lift you up, then stick around. Because this story? It's about the moment everything shifted. And if this hits you the way it hit me, smash that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this ends. My name is Thea Monroe, and 6 months ago, I was barely holding it together. I'm talking living paycheck to paycheck, working 3 different event coordination gigs just to keep the lights on in my mother's old apartment, the same apartment where she spent her final year battling cancer, where I held her hand through treatments I couldn't afford, where I promised her I'd make something of myself. She'd been gone for 2 years, but I was still drowning in the medical debt she left behind. Every month felt like I was running on a treadmill that kept speeding up, and I couldn't catch my breath. But I kept going. I had to. Event coordination was the one thing I was actually good at. I could walk into chaos and turn it into magic. I could take a client's half-formed vision and make it real. It wasn't glamorous work. Most of the time I was coordinating birthday parties for rich kids or corporate mixers where nobody remembered my name. But I was building something. Slowly, carefully. And then, like some kind of miracle I didn't deserve, I got the call. A luxury event company needed a last-minute coordinator for a charity gala. Not just any gala. The kind of event where tickets cost more than my monthly rent. The kind of place where careers are made. They'd had a coordinator drop out, and somehow my name came up. I said yes before they could finish the sentence. This was it. This was my shot to break into the world I'd been clawing toward for years. If I could pull this off, if I could make this night perfect, the right people would notice. Doors would open. My life could actually change. I threw myself into the planning. Every detail had to be flawless. The florals, the lighting, the seating arrangements, the flow of the evening. I barely slept for 2 weeks, but I didn't care. Hope does that to you. It makes you reckless with your own exhaustion. And then, 3 days before the event, I ran into them at a planning meeting. Brielle, Sloane, and Juniper. The girls I grew up with in the same middle-class neighborhood, back when we were all just kids sharing lunch money and secrets. But somewhere along the way, they'd climbed up while I stayed behind. Brielle married into old money, the kind of family with a name that opened doors before she even walked through them. Sloane became an influencer, 2 million followers hanging on her every curated post. And Juniper? She was born into wealth. A trust fund heiress who never had to worry about anything except which yacht party to attend. When Brielle spotted me across that conference room, her face lit up like we were still best friends. She rushed over, air-kissed both my cheeks, and gushed about how amazing it was to see me, how we absolutely had to catch up, how she couldn't believe I was coordinating the gala. And then came the invitation that should have felt like kindness, but landed like a test. She insisted I come as a guest, not just staff. She wanted to introduce me to people, she said. The right people, people who could help my career. Sloane and Juniper nodded along, all smiles and enthusiasm. But there were small moments that made my stomach twist. The way Brielle's eyes lingered on my off-rack blazer. The comment Sloane made about my quaint little apartment when I mentioned where I lived. Juniper's too bright laugh when I said I was single. I should have seen it then, the cracks in their warmth, but I was so desperate to believe that maybe, just maybe, they still saw me as one of them. The night of the gala, I stood in front of my mirror for 20 minutes, smoothing down the fabric of my navy dress. It was simple, elegant, I hoped. I'd found it at a consignment shop and spent my entire savings on it because Brielle's text kept echoing in my head. Wear something bold, Thea. Everyone will be dressed to kill. My dress wasn't bold. It was understated, classic, the kind of thing that wouldn't draw attention. And maybe that was the problem. Maybe I was already failing before I even walked through those doors. But I gave myself a pep talk, looked myself dead in the eyes and said, "You earned this. You belong here because you worked for it." I almost believed it. The ballroom took my breath away. Crystal chandeliers caught the light like frozen stars. Champagne towers sparkled under spotlights. Every woman looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine, dripping in designer gowns and jewelry that cost more than my yearly salary. And there was Brielle, holding court near the entrance in a couture dress that probably cost more than my mother's final hospital bill. She saw me and rushed over with that same bright smile, introducing me to a small circle of people, but every introduction came with a qualifier. "This is Thea. She has the most adorable little event business. Thea's been coordinating the sweetest small parties." The words little and small kept slipping in like tiny knives. I smiled through it, laughed at the right moments, sipped champagne I was too nervous to taste. And then I noticed him, a man standing slightly apart from everyone else, near the far wall. Tall, sharp suit that fit like it was made for his body alone, and this presence that made people instinctively give him space. He wasn't socializing. He was watching, and for just a moment, his eyes met mine across that crowded room before I looked away. Everything shifted when an older woman in diamonds complimented my dress. She said it was refreshingly understated in a sea of excess. And I saw Brielle's face change. The mask cracked. Her smile turned sharp, and her voice rose just enough to carry. "Oh, that's because it's second-hand. Isn't that resourceful? Thea's always been so good at making do with less." The words hit like a slap. People turned. Sloane laughed, this high, performative sound, and pulled out her phone. "This is perfect content. Poverty chic is so in right now." She aimed the camera at me like I was some kind of spectacle. Juniper moved closer, champagne glass in hand, and I saw it coming but couldn't move fast enough. Red wine splashed down the front of my dress, soaking into the fabric, spreading like blood. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry!" Juniper's voice was syrup-sweet, but her eyes were cold. "That dress is so delicate. I hope it's not ruined." And then Brielle's hand was on my shoulder, fingers gripping the strap, yanking hard. "This cheap stitching won't even last the night." The sound of fabric tearing cut through the murmur of conversation. I felt it give way, felt the dress slip slightly, felt every eye in that section of the room lock onto me. The laughter started. Not from everyone, but enough. Enough to make my skin burn. Enough to make me wish I could disappear into the marble floor. Brielle leaned in close, her voice low but vicious. "Did you really think you belonged here? Look at you, Thea, playing dress-up in our world. It's embarrassing." Sloane stepped beside her, still filming. "You'll always be that broke girl from the old neighborhood. No amount of budget shopping will change that." I stood there, wine-stained, dress torn, and something inside me just broke open. I whispered, barely audible. "I thought we were friends." Brielle laughed, actually laughed. "Friends? Thea, you were always just there. A charity case. We felt sorry for you." And before I could think, before I could stop myself, my hand connected with her cheek. Not hard, just enough. A desperate, humiliated reaction from a girl who had nothing left to lose. The entire ballroom went silent. Brielle stumbled back, hand on her face, playing the victim perfectly. Someone mentioned security. And I turned to run, tears finally breaking free, when a voice cut through everything. "Stop!" The voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight, the kind of authority that makes everyone freeze without understanding why. I turned, tears still hot on my cheeks, and saw him walking toward us. The man who'd been watching from across the room. Up close, he was even more intimidating, not because of his height or the way his suit probably cost more than my entire year's rent, but because of his eyes. They were calculating, sharp, like he could see through every pretense in the room. I said stop. He looked at the crowd, then at Brielle, then at me. "Ms. Monroe, isn't it?" The event coordinator who designed tonight's entire experience? I couldn't speak. My throat was closed, my mind racing. How did he know my name? He moved closer and, without asking permission, slipped off his jacket and draped it over my shoulders. It was warm from his body, smelled like expensive cologne and something else. Something clean and grounding. It covered the torn dress, the wine stain, all of it, and then he turned to face the crowd that had been so eager to watch me fall apart. "I want everyone here to understand something." His voice was ice wrapped in silk. "This woman coordinated every detail you're enjoying tonight, the florals you've been photographing for your social media, the lighting that makes you all look better than you actually do, the menu you've been raving about. While you were deciding which designer label to wear, she was working 18-hour days to make sure you'd have an evening worth remembering." I heard whispers rippling through the crowd, people pulling out their phones, but not to film me this time, to search something. And then I heard someone whisper his name. Daxton Vale. The Daxton Vale. Real estate billionaire, venture capitalist, and apparently the man whose foundation was funding this entire event. He turned to Brielle, Sloane, and Juniper. His expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted, got colder. "I've been watching you three all evening. It's fascinating, really, how cruelty masks insecurity." Brielle tried to speak, tried to smile her way through it. "Mr. Vale, I think there's been a misunderstanding. You were just humiliating someone in public because it made you feel powerful." He cut her off smoothly. Then he looked at Sloane. "Your luxury lifestyle brand? The one with 2 million followers? I had my team pull the numbers. You're $60,000 in debt. Most of your sponsorships are fake. You pay for engagement." Sloane's face went white. Her phone nearly slipped from her hands. He shifted to Juniper. "And you. Trust fund heiress. Except your parents control every dollar and they're threatening to cut you off completely because you've burned through your quarterly allowance in 3 weeks. Again." Juniper made a small sound, like something wounded. But he wasn't done. He turned back to Brielle. "Your marriage is falling apart. Your husband's been funneling money to his mistress for 6 months. I know this because he came to me for a loan he was too ashamed to ask his own family for. I declined." The crowd was silent now. Absolutely silent. Brielle's perfect composure cracked completely. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. How do you— "I didn't build an empire by being careless with information. I research everyone, everything. It's how I stay ahead." He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. "Security is on their way. You three are no longer welcome at any event my foundation sponsors. That's every major charity gala, fundraiser, and social event in this city. Consider yourselves permanently removed from the guest lists." I watched Brielle's face crumble, watched Sloane start to cry, her phone finally slipping from her hands and clattering on the marble floor, watched Juniper look around desperately for someone to defend them. No one moved. Security arrived, professional and quiet, and escorted all three of them out. Brielle tried to argue, tried to make a scene, but it didn't matter. The doors closed behind them and the whispers exploded. Everyone talking at once, phones out, the story already spreading. Daxton turned to me, his voice softer now. "There's a balcony through those doors. It's quiet. Would you like some air?" I nodded because I didn't trust my voice, and I followed him away from the crowd, away from the whispers, into something that felt like the first real breath I'd taken all night. The balcony was cold, but I didn't care. The city stretched out below us, lights blinking like scattered stars, and for the first time all night I could breathe. Daxton stood beside me, hands in his pockets, giving me space but staying close enough that I knew he was there. We didn't speak for a long moment, just stood there while my heart remembered how to beat normally again. Finally, he broke the silence. "I grew up poor." His voice was different out here, quieter, more real. Scholarships and 3 jobs. There was a semester where I slept in my car because I couldn't afford both rent and tuition. I know what it's like to walk into a room and feel everyone measuring your worth by your shoes, your address, the way you don't know which fork to use. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't expected. Understanding, not pity. Understanding. "What you did tonight," he continued, "showing up, holding your head high, even in a secondhand dress, even when they tried to destroy you. That takes more courage than anything they'll ever know. They'll never understand that because they've never had to fight for anything real. My voice came out shaky. I slapped her. I lost control. You're human. He turned to face me fully. And you were pushed to a breaking point by people who claim to be your friends. Don't apologize for that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. I want to hire you as the lead coordinator for my foundation's entire event portfolio, not just one-off gigs, full-time, 6-figure salary, benefits, creative control over every event we sponsor. I stared at the card like it might disappear. Why? You don't even know me. I know your work. I've been watching it all night. Every detail of this gala, that was you. The way the lighting shifts as the evening progresses, the way the floral arrangements tell a story from entrance to ballroom, the pacing of the program. That's not luck. That's talent. He paused. And I know what it's like to be underestimated. I invest in people who've had to claw their way up because they're the ones who never take success for granted. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. He reached up, gently wiped it away with his thumb. You never stopped belonging, Thea. They just couldn't see it. That was 6 months ago. 6 months, that feel like a lifetime. I'm sitting in my new apartment now, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows and enough space to actually breathe. I paid off every cent of my mother's medical debt, wrote that final check and cried for an hour because she would have been so proud. I've coordinated 8 major events for Daxton's foundation, and last month I was featured in 2 industry magazines. People know my name now, the right people. I heard about Brielle through the social grapevine that still occasionally reaches me. Her divorce was finalized. She lost her social standing along with her marriage, and last I heard, she's working retail at a department store. Sloane's Instagram account was exposed and deleted. She's trying to rebuild, but nobody trusts her anymore. Juniper got cut off by her family and moved in with distant relatives in another state. I don't feel satisfaction in their falls. I really don't. Just this quiet peace in knowing I rose without needing them to fail. They did that to themselves. And Daxton? We're complicated. There's something building between us, something real and terrifying and wonderful. But we're taking it slow, building it on a foundation of respect and honesty instead of desperation or convenience. I'm coordinating another gala tonight. I chose my dress because I love it, not because I'm trying to prove anything. And as I was walking in, I saw them. Brielle, Sloane, and Juniper, standing outside on the sidewalk, looking in through the tall windows at a world they can no longer enter. I didn't gloat, didn't even pause. I just turned back to my work, felt Daxton's hand find mine across the table, that gentle squeeze that says everything without words. That night taught me something I'll never forget. When people try to tear you down, it's because they see something in you that threatens what they pretend to be. Your worth isn't measured by their cruelty. It's measured by your courage to keep standing. And I'm still standing, stronger than I've ever been. Sometimes the people who try hardest to destroy you are just terrified you'll outshine them. And you will. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button. Let me know I'm not alone in this. Subscribe for more stories about rising above, because trust me, I've got plenty more where this came from. And drop a comment. Have you ever had a friendship turn toxic? How did you handle it? I read every single one. Until next time, remember, you belong exactly where you've worked to be. They called me worthless, threw beer bottles at my head and laughed as I begged them to stop. But when that black Bentley pulled up and the window rolled down, their laughter died in their throats. Because the man stepping out wasn't just any stranger, he was about to change everything. If you believe karma always finds a way, smash that like button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever witnessed justice served? Subscribe for more incredible true stories. You know that feeling when you're so exhausted that every step feels like you're walking through quicksand? That was me at 11 o'clock that night, dragging myself down Fifth Avenue with my worn medical bag slung over my shoulder like some kind of badge of honor I wasn't sure I'd earned. My name is Thalia Meridian, and 16 hours earlier I'd walked into St. Catherine's Hospital thinking it would be just another double shift. I had no idea that this ordinary Tuesday night would become the moment that split my life into before and after. The October air bit through my thin scrubs, and I pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders. Most people don't realize that nurses' uniforms aren't made for warmth. They're made for efficiency, for quick changes when someone's life is literally in your hands. I'd changed out of my blood-stained top twice that day. First, when Mrs. Rodriguez came in after her car accident, and again when little Tommy Chen needed emergency surgery after falling off his bike. That's the thing about being a pediatric trauma nurse. You see humanity at its most fragile, and somehow you're supposed to hold it all together. My feet ached in my worn sneakers as I took the shortcut through downtown. I knew I shouldn't walk alone this late, but the last bus home left in 12 minutes, and if I missed it, I'd have to pay for a taxi I couldn't afford. Every dollar mattered when you're raising a 6-year-old son on a nurse's salary. Finn was probably already asleep at Mrs. Patterson's house, curled up with his favorite stuffed elephant, dreaming of becoming an astronaut or a superhero or whatever magnificent thing his beautiful mind had latched onto that day. The thought of his sleepy smile when I picked him up in the morning was the only thing keeping my legs moving. I passed the glowing windows of upscale restaurants and boutiques, their warm light spilling onto the sidewalk like promises of a life I'd never quite managed to reach. There's something humbling about walking through wealth when your medical bag is held together with duct tape and your shoes have holes you've strategically covered with permanent marker. But I wasn't bitter. At least I told myself I wasn't. I'd chosen this life, chosen to help people, chosen to matter in the ways that really count. The fact that society doesn't pay you well for saving lives is just one of those cruel ironies you learn to swallow. The sound of loud laughter erupted from Gatsby's, the expensive sports bar where young executives and trust fund kids went to celebrate closing deals or spending daddy's money. I barely glanced over, too tired to care about their world of champagne toasts and designer suits. My world was different. It was about making sure IV lines stayed clear at 3 a.m. and holding the hand of someone's grandmother while she took her last breath. It was about coming home to a little boy who thought I was the strongest person in the world, even when I felt like I was barely hanging on by a thread. As I reached the intersection where I'd turned toward the bus stop, I heard footsteps behind me. Not the casual click of heels or the purposeful stride of someone heading home, something else. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I'd learned to trust those instincts working night shifts in the emergency room. Sometimes your gut knows danger before your brain catches up. I clutched my medical bag a little tighter and quickened my pace. Just get to the bus stop, I told myself. Just get home to Finn. I had no way of knowing that in the next few minutes, 3 drunk strangers would try to destroy everything I believed about my own worth, and that a man I'd never met would step out of a car that cost more than I'd make in 5 years to prove them wrong. Sometimes fate doesn't knock. Sometimes it crashes into your life like a freight train, reshaping everything you thought you knew about justice, power, and what it means to matter in this world. Those footsteps I'd been hearing? They belonged to 3 men who stumbled out of Gatsby's like they owned the entire street. I could smell the alcohol on them from 10 feet away, that sour, expensive stench of craft beer and entitlement. The tallest one, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a watch that probably cost more than my car, stepped directly into my path. His friends flanked him like predators who'd found their prey. "Hey there, nurse," the blonde one called out, reading the hospital ID still clipped to my scrubs. "Rough night saving lives? You look like you could use some fun." His words slurred together, but his eyes were sharp with malice. I tried to step around him, but he moved with me, blocking my escape route to the bus stop that suddenly felt impossibly far away. "Please, I just need to get home," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "My son is waiting for me." I thought mentioning Finn might spark some decency in them, some recognition that I was a person with a family, with people who needed me. Instead, it seemed to amuse them. The second one, shorter but broader, with dark hair slicked back like some wannabe Wall Street wolf, let out a bark of laughter. "A kid? God, you really are desperate, aren't you? What kind of man would want to deal with that baggage? He gestured at me like I was something distasteful he'd found on his shoe. The words hit me like physical blows, each one designed to cut deeper than the last, but it was the third one who made my blood turn to ice. Red-headed, freckled, looking like he'd never worked a day in his life, he pulled out his phone and started recording. "This is perfect," he said, grinning at his screen. "Look what we found crawling around downtown. Should we call animal control?" They all erupted in laughter, the kind of cruel, cutting sound that echoes in hospital corridors when someone doesn't make it. I clutched my medical bag tighter, knuckles white against the worn leather. "Stop it. Just leave me alone." But my plea only encouraged them. The blonde one, who seemed to be their ringleader, stepped closer until I could see the expensive cologne couldn't quite mask the stench of privilege and cruelty. "What's in the bag, Florence Nightingale? Let's see what kind of bargain basement medical supplies the city gives you charity cases." Before I could react, he grabbed my bag and yanked it from my shoulder. The strap, already weakened from years of use, snapped completely. My bag hit the pavement and everything spilled out like my professional life was being scattered for their entertainment. I dropped to my knees without thinking, desperately trying to gather my stethoscope, my blood pressure cuff, the small medical supplies that represented everything I'd worked for, but the red-headed one stepped on my stethoscope deliberately, grinding his designer shoe into the chest piece until I heard the metal crack. "Oops," he said with mock concern. "Looks like your cheap equipment couldn't handle a little pressure." That's when the blonde one picked up a half-empty beer bottle from the gutter. "Maybe this will teach you to stay in your lane," he sneered, and before I could move, he hurled it at me. The glass caught me on the shoulder and I stumbled forward, my palms scraping against the concrete as I tried to catch myself. I felt the warm trickle of blood from a small cut on my cheek where a glass shard had grazed me. I was on my hands and knees in the middle of a downtown sidewalk, bleeding, while 3 strangers recorded my humiliation for their entertainment. People walked by, their eyes sliding past us like we were invisible. No one stopped, no one helped. In that moment, I felt smaller than I ever had in my life, more powerless than when I'd held dying patients in my arms and couldn't save them. "Look at her," the dark-haired one said with disgust. "Pathetic! Some people just don't know their place in the world." As I knelt there, trembling with rage and shame, watching my medical supplies roll into the gutter, I had no idea that someone was watching. Someone who would soon teach these 3 exactly what place really meant in this world. The low rumble started as just a vibration in the pavement beneath my scraped palms, but it grew into something that made the 3 men pause their cruel laughter. A car engine, but not just any engine. This was the deep, throaty purr of machinery that costs more than most people's houses. I looked up through my tears and saw headlights cutting through the October darkness, approaching slowly, deliberately, like a predator sizing up its prey. The sleek black Bentley that pulled up to the curb was so pristine it seemed to absorb the streetlight rather than reflect it. Everything about it whispered power, from its perfect paint job to the way it moved with absolute silence once the engine stopped. The 3 men who'd been so confident moments before suddenly shifted uncomfortably, their drunken bravado flickering like a candle in the wind. The tinted window rolled down with mechanical precision, and I caught a glimpse of a profile that belonged in a boardroom, not on a downtown street at midnight. When the door opened, the man who stepped out didn't hurry, didn't rush. He moved with the kind of calm authority that comes from never having to question whether you belong in a room. He was tall, probably 6'2", wearing a suit that fit him like it had been crafted specifically for his frame. His dark hair was perfectly styled, despite the late hour, and when his eyes swept over the scene, I saw something in them that made my breath catch. Cold calculation mixed with barely controlled fury. "Gentlemen," he said, and his voice carried the kind of quiet power that made you lean in to listen. "Is there a problem here?" He didn't look at me. Not yet. His entire focus was on my tormentors, and I watched them transform from predators into prey in the space of a heartbeat. The blonde one, who'd seemed so confident throwing bottles at a defenseless woman, now stumbled over his words. Hey man, we're just having some fun with the local help. Nothing serious. He tried to laugh, but it came out strangled and nervous. That's when the stranger's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and I saw what real anger looked like when it was wrapped in perfect control. The local help? He repeated, each word precisely enunciated. This woman is a registered nurse. While you three waste oxygen, she saves lives. He stepped closer to them, and despite being outnumbered, they instinctively backed away. He pulled out his phone with fluid grace, never taking his eyes off them. Detective Morrison? This is Evander Cross. I'm sending you a video that I think you'll find very interesting. My heart nearly stopped. Evander Cross. Even I knew that name. Tech mogul, billionaire, the man whose company had revolutionized medical software. And he was standing in the middle of a street at midnight, defending me. The red-headed one who'd been recording everything went pale. Wait, you can't be serious? It was just a joke, man. We were just messing around. But Evander was already showing them his phone screen, and from where I knelt on the pavement, I could see their faces reflected in its glow. Caught, exposed, their cruelty immortalized in high definition. I've been watching through the security cameras, Evander said conversationally, as if he was discussing the weather. My company owns half the buildings on this street. We have excellent surveillance systems. He scrolled through his phone with deliberate slowness. Assault, public intoxication, destruction of medical property, harassment. Should I continue? The dark-haired one tried to play the connection card. Do you know who my father is? He's Congressman Mitchell. Evander finished smoothly. I donated to his opponent in the last election. Coincidentally, I also have his personal number if you'd like me to call him. The sound of approaching sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder with each second. It was in that moment, as I watched three bullies realize they'd picked on the wrong person in front of the wrong witness, that I understood what real power looked like. It wasn't about money or connections. It was about using what you had to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Evander Cross could have driven past, could have ignored the scene playing out on his street. Instead, he'd stopped. And everything was about to change. The police sirens weren't just getting closer, they were multiplying. What started as one distant wail had become a chorus of justice rolling down Fifth Avenue like thunder. I watched the three men who'd destroyed my dignity minutes earlier now stumble over each other in panic, their expensive clothes suddenly looking like costumes they'd borrowed for a party they weren't invited to. "This is insane," the blonde one stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "You can't be serious about this. We were just having fun." But Evander Cross stood there like a monument to karma itself, unmoved by their desperate pleas. "Fun," he repeated, the word hanging in the air like a blade. "Is that what you call throwing glass bottles at healthcare workers?" He knelt down beside me then, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine kindness in someone's eyes. He offered me his handkerchief, silk, probably worth more than my weekly grocery budget, to dab at the cut on my cheek. The police cars arrived like a convoy of reckoning, their red and blue lights painting the street in colors of justice. Detective Morrison stepped out of the lead car, a woman in her 40s with the kind of no-nonsense expression that told me she'd seen enough of the world's cruelty to appreciate when someone finally fought back. "Mr. Cross?" She nodded to Evander with obvious respect. "I got your message. You said you had video evidence?" He handed her his phone without a word, and I watched her face darken as she reviewed the footage. When she looked up at my three attackers, her disgust was palpable. "Brixton Mitchell, Caspian Hartwell, Riker Blackstone," she said, reading from what I assumed were their driver's licenses. "Assault, destruction of property, public intoxication, and harassment. You gentlemen just earned yourselves a night in county lockup." That's when Brixton played his final card, the one that entitled men like him always thought would save them. "Detective, I think there's been a misunderstanding. My father is Congressman Mitchell. One phone call and this whole thing disappears." He actually smirked as he said it, still believing his last name was a get-out-of-jail-free card. Evander's laugh was soft but cutting. "Your father," he said thoughtfully. The same congressman who's been pushing legislation to defund public hospitals? The one who voted against the Healthcare Workers Protection Act 3 times? He pulled out his phone again. I wonder how he'll feel when this video goes viral. Congressman's son attacks nurse has such a nice ring to it, don't you think? I watched Brixton's face crumble as the reality hit him. This wasn't going away. His connections wouldn't save him. For the first time in his privileged life, consequences had found him, and they had teeth. As the handcuffs clicked into place on all 3 men, Evander helped me to my feet with gentle hands. "Are you hurt badly?" he asked. And I was struck by how different his voice sounded when he wasn't delivering justice, softer, more human. "I'll be okay," I managed, though my hands were still shaking. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you enough." "My mother was a nurse," he said quietly, watching the police car pull away with my attackers. "She worked nights at County General for 30 years. She always said that nurses were the backbone of civilization, that without people like you, society would collapse." He looked at me directly then, and I saw something that surprised me. Not pity, not condescension, but recognition. Respect. "I've been looking for someone to head my new medical foundation," he continued as we walked toward his car. $50 million dedicated to supporting healthcare workers who've been overlooked and undervalued, someone who understands what it means to fight for people who can't fight for themselves. He paused, studying my face. "Someone exactly like you." 6 months later, I stood at a podium addressing a conference of medical professionals, wearing a suit that actually fit properly, speaking about dignity and worth in healthcare. Finn was in the front row, beaming with pride at his mom who'd somehow transformed a night of humiliation into a platform for change. And in the back, Evander Cross nodded approvingly, the man who'd taught me that sometimes the universe doesn't just deliver justice, it delivers transformation. They threw wine in my face at a charity gala, slapped me in front of cameras, called me a nobody while the crowd laughed. I stood there, mascara running, dress stained red, humiliated, but they didn't know my father had been watching everything, and what he did next destroyed them in 48 hours. This is the story of how I went from being publicly destroyed to watching my tormentors lose everything. It's raw, it's real, and if you've ever felt powerless, this story is for you. Hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next will shock you. My name is Sienna, and for most of my life, I was really good at being invisible. Not in a sad, dramatic way. I just learned early that blending in was easier than explaining why my father was never around. While other kids had parents at soccer games and school plays, I had birthday cards with checks inside and a father who existed more as a signature than a person. His name is Dorian Vale, and if you're wondering why that sounds familiar, well, you'll understand soon enough. Back then, I just knew him as the man who was always on a plane to somewhere that mattered more than I did. I grew up with my aunt in a small apartment that smelled like lavender and old books. She raised me on museum trips and library cards, teaching me that beauty existed in quiet places if you knew where to look. That's probably why I fell in love with art history. There was something comforting about studying paintings from centuries ago, learning about artists who poured their souls onto canvas and left pieces of themselves behind long after they were gone. I wanted that, to create something that mattered, something that proved I existed beyond the empty space my father left. When I landed an internship at the Ashford Gallery at 22, I thought I'd finally found my place. The gallery was this stunning converted warehouse in the city with floor-to-ceiling windows and white walls that made every piece of art feel like it was floating. I was nobody there, just the intern who made coffee runs and labeled inventory, but I didn't care. I was surrounded by beauty, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That's where I met Thalia Moreau. She walked into the gallery one afternoon like she owned the light itself. All glossy, dark hair, designer clothes, and a smile that could convince you the sky was green if she wanted it to be. She was there for a private viewing, and somehow we started talking about a sculpture near the entrance. She was charming, funny, easy to talk to. She asked about my life, my dreams, and actually seemed to listen when I answered. Before I left that day, she handed me her card. "You should come to our event next week," she said. "I like your energy." I had no idea who the Moreaus were back then. I didn't know that her family owned Rain Media, this massive influencer marketing empire that controlled half the internet's biggest personalities. I didn't know her brother Rain was a CEO who treated people like chess pieces, or that her best friend Aster had 2 million followers who hung on her every word. I just knew that Thalia made me feel seen for the first time in years, and when you've spent your whole life being invisible, that feeling is intoxicating. Within weeks, I was part of their world. Gallery openings where champagne flowed like water, rooftop parties where everyone knew everyone and the city lights glittered below us like scattered diamonds, exclusive events where velvet ropes parted when Thalia approached. She introduced me as her friend, and suddenly people remembered my name. I started believing that maybe I wasn't meant to be invisible after all. Maybe I'd finally found where I belonged. I had no idea I was walking straight into a nightmare. 3 months into this new life, I was helping curate a small photography exhibition at the gallery when I met Caspian. He was one of the featured artists, this quiet guy with paint-stained hands and eyes that actually focused on you when you spoke, like your words mattered. We started talking about his work, these raw black-and-white portraits of forgotten neighborhoods, and the conversation just flowed. No pretense, no performance, just two people who understood that art was supposed to mean something. When he laughed at something I said, it felt real in a way nothing had felt real in months. Thalia noticed. Of course she noticed. I saw her watching us from across the gallery, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips, and something in her expression shifted. The warmth I'd gotten used to cooled by several degrees. Later that week, during a pitch meeting with potential donors, she accidentally knocked over her champagne, and it splashed directly onto my portfolio. The pages I'd spent weeks preparing turned translucent and warped as expensive alcohol soaked through. "Oh my God, Sienna, I'm so sorry," she said, but her eyes were completely flat. Everyone rushed to help clean up, and I told myself it was an accident because the alternative was too painful to consider. But Thalia had already decided what came next. 2 weeks later, she approached me with what she called a massive opportunity. Rain Media was launching a new campaign about real people making it in creative industries, and she wanted to feature me. "Your story is perfect," she said, squeezing my hand like we were sisters. "The girl who built herself from nothing, following her dreams despite everything. People need to see that authenticity. I should have heard the trap in those words, but all I heard was validation. All I heard was finally being seen." The interview felt intense but intimate. Thalia asked about my childhood, my relationship with my father, the lonely holidays and empty chairs at graduation. She asked about money, about struggle, about what it felt like to want something so badly you could taste it. I cried on camera. I told her things I'd never told anyone because I thought we were friends, and I thought she cared. She held my hand afterward and said, "You're so brave, Sienna. This is going to change your life." She was right about that part. When the video went live 2 weeks later, my life changed completely, but not the way she promised. They'd titled it, "Trust Fund Babies Pretending to be Poor," and they'd turned my vulnerability into a weapon. Every emotional moment I'd shared was spliced and edited to make me look like a liar. They dug up my father's name, Dorian Vale, reclusive billionaire investor, and plastered it across the screen with mocking text overlays. "Poor little rich girl cosplaying poverty. Daddy's money bought that gallery internship. She's been playing you all along." The comments started immediately, thousands of them, then tens of thousands. "Privileged brat, fake, fraud, cancel her." My phone became a weapon that wouldn't stop firing. I was tagged in posts calling for my head, demanding I lose everything. Strangers who'd never met me decided who I was based on 90 seconds of edited lies. I called Thalia, hands shaking, voice breaking, and she let it go to voicemail. When she finally texted back, all it said was, "You should have been honest from the start." I learned later that honesty was never the point. Destruction was always the plan. 1 week after the video destroyed my reputation, there was a charity gala for emerging artists. I was supposed to present a piece I'd been working on for months, and every logical part of my brain screamed at me to stay home. But I'd poured my soul into that work, and hiding felt like letting Thalia win. So I showed up in a white dress I'd saved for months to buy, holding on to the last shreds of my dignity like they were made of glass. The moment I walked through those gallery doors, I knew I'd made a mistake. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. Phones came out immediately, not even trying to be subtle about it. I could feel their stares like physical touches, their whispers cutting through the classical music playing softly in the background. But I kept walking, heels clicking against marble floors, pretending I couldn't hear them dissecting me in real time. Thalia was there, of course. She stood near the bar with Rain and Aster, all three of them dressed like they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, radiating the kind of confidence that comes from never having to question whether you belong somewhere. When our eyes met across the room, she smiled. Actually smiled. That's when I knew this wasn't an accident. She'd been waiting for me. I made it through my presentation somehow, my voice steadier than I expected while I talked about my work. But then I heard the click of heels on marble, sharp and deliberate, and everyone turned to watch Thalia approach me. She was holding a glass of red wine, and the crowd seemed to sense something was coming because the room went completely silent. Even the background music felt like it was holding its breath. "Sienna, darling," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Should we tell everyone how you really paid for art school?" I opened my mouth to respond, to defend myself, but she didn't wait for an answer. She threw the wine directly in my face. The cold liquid hit me like a slap, splashing across my eyes and nose, flooding my mouth with bitter taste. I gasped, stumbling backward, wine dripping from my chin and soaking into my white dress. The stains spread like blood, dark red bleeding across fabric I'd never be able to clean. For one horrible second the room was completely silent. Then someone laughed. Then someone else. Then the whole crowd erupted, and suddenly there were phones everywhere, recording my humiliation from every angle. Aster's voice cut through the noise. "What's wrong? Daddy won't buy you a new one?" Rain started a slow clap, mocking and deliberate, and others joined in. The sound echoed off the high ceilings, bouncing around my skull. Thalia leaned in close, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper only I could hear. "You thought you were one of us. You're nothing, Sienna. You'll always be nothing." Then she slapped me. The crack echoed through the suddenly silent room, sharp and final. My cheek exploded with heat, ears ringing, tears mixing with wine on my face. Someone in the crowd yelled, "Fake!" "Fraud!" And the mob energy shifted into something uglier. I saw Caspian standing near the back, his face twisted with horror, but he was frozen. Everyone was frozen. Everyone except the people recording, capturing my destruction for the world to consume. Gallery security appeared at my elbow, escorting me toward the exit like I was the problem, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. I ran. The video went viral within hours. "Rich girl gets what she deserves" trended worldwide, with millions of people watching me get wine thrown in my face and slapped in an endless loop. Strangers on the internet celebrated my humiliation like it was entertainment, like I wasn't a real person bleeding behind the screen. The gallery fired me via a cold corporate email. People recognized me on the street and heckled me. I stopped leaving my apartment, stopped showering, stopped answering my phone. I just sat in the dark, watching my life disintegrate in real time, wondering if this was how it ended. On day 5 of my self-imposed isolation, I finally called my father. I hadn't spoken to him in months, maybe longer, but I was drowning and I didn't know who else to reach for. When he answered, I just broke. No explanation, no context, just raw, ugly crying. "Dad!" I sobbed. "I need you." There was a pause on the other end, so long I thought he'd hung up. Then his voice came through, cracked and rough in a way I'd never heard before. "I'm on my way." He showed up at my apartment 6 hours later. Dorian Vale, The ghost father who'd missed every important moment of my life, standing in my doorway with gray hair and steel eyes and an expression that looked almost like fear. He didn't ask questions. He just held me while I cried into his expensive suit, and for the first time in my entire life, my father felt real. When I finally had no tears left, he sat me down and said, "Tell me everything, every single detail." So I did. I showed him the videos, the comments, the emails, the way they'd torn me apart for sport. He watched it all without saying a word, but I saw his jaw tighten with every second. When the last video finished playing, he looked at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Rage pure, controlled, deliberate rage. "I've been a terrible father," he said quietly. "Let me be a father now." He pulled out his phone and made a single call. "I need everything on Rain Media. Financial records, business practices, personal histories, everything. You have 24 hours. I didn't understand what was happening until his team started sending reports. Turns out, when you're a billionaire investor who controls stakes in half the companies in 3 countries, you have resources most people can't imagine. Within a day, my father's investigators had uncovered everything. Rain Media's empire wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. Fake follower farms generating millions in fraudulent engagement, undisclosed paid sponsorships violating FTC regulations, charity donations from their foundation that never reached the foster kids they claimed to help, embezzled into offshore accounts instead, blackmail schemes forcing smaller influencers to join their network or face coordinated destruction, tax evasion sophisticated enough to require federal investigation. My father didn't yell, he didn't threaten, he just made calls. To his lawyers, to federal agencies, to the brands partnering with Rain Media, to every single company where he held influence. And then he waited. The first domino fell 12 hours later when the FTC announced an investigation, then the IRS, then the SEC. Major brands started dropping partnerships, releasing statements about not tolerating fraud. News outlets picked up the story. Within 24 hours, Rain Media under federal investigation was trending instead of my humiliation. Their stock plummeted. Banks froze their accounts. Former employees came forward as whistleblowers, no longer afraid. 48 hours after my father made that first phone call, Thalia and Rain were arrested on camera. The same phones that recorded my destruction captured them in handcuffs. Justice isn't always poetic, but sometimes it's perfectly timed. Rain Media collapsed completely within a month. The federal charges were just the beginning: wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, charity fraud. Thalia and Rain both faced 10 years minimum in prison. Astor fled to Monaco but got extradited 3 weeks later. Their parents' entire empire crumbled as assets were seized and frozen. The internet, that same mob that had celebrated my destruction, suddenly reversed course. "We were wrong about Sienna Vale" became the new narrative, with people falling over themselves to apologize for believing lies. But here's what I learned. Strangers' opinions are just noise. They don't define you when they love you, and they don't define you when they hate you. Only you get to decide who you are. My father and I started therapy together. Twice a week, we sat in a quiet office with cream-colored walls and talked about all the years we'd lost. He admitted things I'd needed to hear my whole life, that he'd hidden behind work because he didn't know how to be a dad, that watching me hurt woke something in him he thought he'd buried. "I was so busy building empires," he said one session, tears streaming down his face. "I forgot to build a relationship with my daughter." We started having dinner every Sunday, just the two of us. No phones, no distractions, just conversations about everything and nothing. He taught me about investments and business strategy. I taught him about art and what it means to create something that comes from your soul instead of your wallet. 6 months after everything fell apart, I opened my own gallery. It's small, nothing like the prestigious spaces I'd dreamed of, but it's mine. Caspian became my business partner, and somewhere between late nights planning exhibitions and early mornings drinking coffee and comfortable silence, he became more than that too. We feature real artists telling real stories, the ones who don't fit into neat boxes, the ones the big galleries overlook. Our first exhibition was called Invisible No More, and it was about surviving public humiliation and finding yourself on the other side. My father sat front row at the opening, crying openly while I gave my speech. Afterward, he hugged me and whispered, "I'm so proud of you." I'd waited 22 years to hear those words. 3 months ago, I received a letter from Thalia. Prison had stripped away all her polish, leaving behind just handwriting on cheap paper. "I'm sorry," she wrote. "I was cruel because I was empty. I destroyed people because I had nothing real inside myself." I read it twice, then put it in a drawer. I didn't respond. Maybe one day I'll forgive her, but that day isn't about her. It's about me choosing to let go of weight I don't want to carry anymore. They tried to erase me. They threw wine in my face and slapped me in front of cameras and told the world I was nothing. But here's the truth they never understood. You can't destroy someone who refuses to stay broken. My father taught me that real power isn't about crushing people who hurt you. It's about protecting the people you love and building something meaningful from the ashes. I'm not invisible anymore. I define myself now, and no one gets to take that away ever again. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment telling me about a time you rose above someone who tried to break you. Smash that like button and subscribe for more true stories about courage, revenge, and redemption. Remember, your worth isn't determined by who tries to tear you down. You define yourself. This is my story. But maybe, in some way, it's yours too.